Hi, this is Bruce Dickinson, and you're tuned in to Side Jams with Bryan Reesman.
Greetings, everyone. This is Bryan Reesman, host of Side Jams, the podcast where we talk to musicians about their outside passions and their hobbies. And today we have Wolf Hoffmann,
Yay!
guitarist and original founder of Accept.
How's it going?
It's good. I'm enjoying your new album, Humanoid. Definitely has like a feeling, I think I said this to you recently, has the feeling of sort of, it's a modern sound, but it has a classic Accept feeling, which you didn't even think about when you were doing it. It just sort of happened.
These things sort of just happen accidentally and without us even being fully aware of any of that. I guess it's a lot easier for somebody from the outside who hears a new album. They go like, "Oh yeah, it reminds me of this and that," or "It's got a such and such vibe." But internally, when we work on this stuff, it's just not clear. These sort of nuances. They just happen to be new songs that we came up with, but it's not something. It's never a conscious decision or anything. It just sort of happens by itself.
Well, yeah, and another something obviously I've spoken about before is your love of photography. The
Right.
first time I interviewed you was the late '90s. I think it was like the Final Chapter live album that had come out through
Oh my
CMC.
God. Many moons ago. Yeah.
Like a quarter century ago. That's how long we've been talking. And I think over the years I would just randomly call and talk to you guys down in
That's right.
in
That's
Nashville,
right. Yeah.
and then of course it was at the first show in New York City with Mark. But we spoke, and you were at that point because Accept had gone on. I guess at the time we weren't sure if it was a hiatus or what was happening. You had started doing commercial photography. You did portraits. You also did like corporate photography and landscapes.
Right.
And I actually found that stuff's not up on your website anymore. But I went onto Wayback Machine here, and I actually found some of the old.
Did you? Oh,
Yeah, there's
nice.
some old
Yeah.
photographs here. There's a lot of landscapes and some snowy landscapes, which I'm assuming means that when it did snow in Tennessee, you were rushing
No,
out to
this
take
was
photos.
no, nope, nope. I have to correct you. This was at the time I lived in Vermont, and Vermont was a
That's
beautiful.
right.
Oh, it still is a beautiful state, and there's so many great opportunities. So I did, yeah. I mean, I did like many photographers do. I guess when you discover your love of photography, you tend to want to be experimenting by yourself. You don't really want to necessarily always want to have the added stress of shooting people. That's what I did. I wanted to be a landscape photographer, and I loved the solitude. I loved sort of just experimenting with stuff in the dark room, and that's what my first serious attempt at photography was all about landscapes. And I was a huge fan of Ansel Adams. And I read all his books. I got into a big dark room and did all that stuff with large format photographers. So at the time I lived in Vermont, and that's really what I wanted to do initially.
I think you moved to Nashville soon after that because
That's right.
I was
Yeah.
living in Massachusetts outside Boston. I could stop by and say hi, and you guys went down to Nashville. But it was interesting because that's back in the days when people had dark rooms. Like I went to NYU Film School a few years before that, and I had a photography class freshman year. So I had to cut on film, use a
Right.
Steenbeck. I had to go in the darkroom. I had to play around with exposures and contrast and everything else. And these days, it's all digital.
Right. I mean, I loved those days back then because it was a huge challenge. I mean, it couldn't be difficult enough for me because I was actually shooting wooden field cameras, 4x5 format. That means you have a sheet of film, and you have to load it in the dark, and you have like a sheet film holder that you stick into the camera,
Yep.
and you have to have a dark. I mean, it's literally like a century ago, but that was the best quality available at the time. If you wanted to make large, beautiful prints,
Yeah.
it was an art form that's altogether lost nowadays with the digital time in the digital times. But it was so complicated. I mean, I could talk for hours about what it all took and how much you had to learn and how much experience you had to have to get
Yeah.
a decent picture made with this sort of equipment. It was fun as hell, but difficult. My God.
Well, I used to. I don't know what did you shoot with? Because my dad was a Nikon guy, and I
Yeah.
know Nikon versus Canon is often the big.
Right. Yeah. I mean, when I then went for 35 millimeter, I was a Canon guy initially,
Mhm.
and then I don't know, sometime later, at one point, I switched over to Nikon, but I was always more into Canon. But this early stuff that I did, that was neither. I mean, it was literally wooden cameras, and medium format cameras. I had all kinds of.
But you started doing photography when you were a kid, right? Or was it teenage years?
No, I tell you, when it was in 1984 when we came to America for the first tour with Accept, and I started to see the world. I went to a lot of national parks and just wanted to document everything, and one thing led to another, and before I knew it, I was an addict. Back in those days, in the very early days of my photography, it was all about 1 hour film development and all that.
Yes.
Remember those
Photo
1 hour
mat.
labs that they used to have? If you wanted to get something quick back, oh my God, you can get it back in 1 hour. That's amazing. So you dropped your film off and get the prints back on the road somewhere. So yeah.
And so what you were shooting, do you have a lot of band photos from that era? Do you take a
I do. But unfortunately, I have actually quite a collection of early photographs of the band, just tour life and stuff that interested me on the road. But I'm never in any of the shots because I took the pictures,
Well, Stuart Copeland filmed a lot of stuff from the Police, and a lot of it was often from his perspective. He takes photographs from his perspective, so he's in a lot of the shots, but he's not in a lot of other things. They did a whole documentary on this, the way he did really document the band's rise and their history.
See, I never wanted to document anything because I didn't think anybody would even be interested, because I didn't think of eternity. I didn't think like 40 years later somebody would be even talking about it or thinking about it. I just took it for then and there, and this is fun. Let's snap, 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 like we do with iPhones nowadays.
I'm curious, when you got into, what led you into the commercial photography world?
Yeah, well, let's go back to the Vermont days, and back then I was like all about art photography, right? I wanted to be, maybe a photographer who has his stuff in galleries, and I did, talk to gallery people, and I discovered after a while, and I tried this avenue, that man, it's just really hard to make any sort of living, to even recover your expenses for this art form was really, really difficult. So
Yeah.
then I found out how much money commercial photographers make, the people who shoot just for advertising or for even newspaper art. And back in those days, a lot of the magazines would still hire photographers and send them out on assignment, just to get, I don't know, say a magazine needed a picture of a mother and a child walking in the park or something.
Yeah.
Very generic. Back in those days, there wasn't hardly any stock photography, or certainly not.
Really?
Well, there was some stock agencies, but a lot of the people that hired photographers, they wanted something very specific, and it was maybe not available. So they hired a photographer. He went out and he got a good fee, and he had, film expenses and all that stuff. So there was a budget for all these things back then. And I thought, well, maybe I should explore that avenue. And I assisted a very successful German photographer who did a bunch of, high-profile cigarette campaigns and fashion photography. And I worked with him for about a year or so to sort of get into the business and see how real pros actually work.
Yeah.
And that led, one thing led to another. And eventually I said, okay, I've learned enough. I worked with a bunch of other photographers in Nashville at that time. In Nashville there was a lot of, because it was a music city, there was a lot of photo shoots involving, artists and country artists and musicians in general. So I did that for a while too, until finally I said, okay, I've learned enough, and I'm going to be a photographer myself.
So who were you working with?
Initially it wasn't so easy to get hired, because you had to have a book and you sent your book around, and let's see, I got a lot of magazine assignments initially, and in the end I sort of gravitated towards corporate photography, because there was a big market for that. And then I found it as actually quite a challenge to make somebody look good. Once I overcame my initial, I wouldn't say I was afraid of it, but it's not so easy to take a good photo of a person you don't even know that well. when you get hired to shoot a picture of a CEO or somebody like that at a company,
Yeah.
you know, you need to get them relaxed and loose, and you get to talk to them, and you get to sort of try this position, that position, and develop some sort of relationship with the person, and
Yeah.
and really make them look good with lighting and all. So I took that. That was a fun time. I really enjoyed doing that, and so yeah.
What were some of your favorite photographs from that time period?
Well, one project really comes to mind that sticks out more than others, or all others really, is I was hired to shoot a guitar. First, I was hired to shoot a guitar collection of Chet Atkins,
Really?
the legendary guitar player and president of RCA and producer. And I mean, he's sort of he wasn't that well known to me, but I knew he was a big deal. And I got hired to shoot his private guitar collection for a coffee table book, and that in turn led to another project that involved the same thing for Les Paul. Les Paul at that time was in his 80s,
Yeah.
and he lived in this amazing house in New Jersey. So here I am. I mean, my background, you know, I was guitar player, of course, but the people who hired me had no idea. They just hired me as a photographer. And here I am going to Les Paul's house for about a week
Really?
and have access to all his personal instruments. I get to shoot a portrait of him. He had all this amazing equipment, like the first, you know, electric guitar and the prototypes for Les Paul guitars, and amazing stuff that nobody else gets to see or touch or whatever. And I could just handle it and put it here, place it there, shoot the pictures, and it was fantastic. It was really a dream project, and it turned into a nice big coffee table book that was sold to collectors and fan club people and things like that. And I still have a copy of it at my house.
What was the book called?
I think it's called Me and My Guitars, if I'm not correct. Oh, no, it's called Me and My Guitars. I think that was Chet Atkins, but Les Paul in his own words. I think it's called.
That's cool. So did you talk to these guys about guitar at all when you were doing
I
it?
sure did. Yeah. Yeah, but, you know, that it's funny.
What did you learn anything interesting about guitar playing from them?
No, we didn't really. I mean, it was fascinating because, I mean, here's Les Paul, this living legend, living in this old, creepy house that was like untouched since the 60s, basically. Nobody had ever done any remodeling or redecorating. It looked really just like a time capsule. And yeah, it was definitely an interesting experience. And I saw him sitting there all by himself in the middle of the night. He was a night owl, actually. He only got up at 4 in the afternoon and was up all night. And I saw him many times. He was still performing a little bit in New York City in this club called the Iridium. Yeah. And I actually followed him to one of the shows while I was there. But I saw him practicing all by himself in the middle of the night in the kitchen there, and that was a touching moment because I thought he's played all his life and he's a living legend, and yet he still sits there and practices guitar. It was very, very moving.
Do you have any shot? Did you take any shots of them? Any portraits of them?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, sure.
Obviously, recently you're taking photos with your iPhone. And
sure. Yeah.
What do you like to take now? What photos do you like to take these days?
I mean, just funny snapshots along the road. You know, I don't know. Yesterday I shot Uwe as he was sleeping in the van. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna get you.
Yeah.
But I mean, sometimes if I have a day off or so, like I remember not too long ago, I went through Buenos Aires and I thought, okay, I'm going to be a street photographer. I'm going to try to get some cool photos because it was a really interesting city. I love Buenos Aires.
Yeah.
So I took some street photography. I don't know, maybe a dozen or 20 photos, and I actually put them up on my Instagram back then, and I got some pretty good response from people saying, "Oh, these are nice, interesting, beautiful." So I thought, I should do that more often. But then, you know, daily life goes on, and I'm so much involved in music that I don't really always find the time to actually switch heads and become a photographer again. You know.
Well, you shot this album cover, Objection Overruled.
I did.
Which is actually, I think, my favorite Accept album.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah, I've realized because it's got the sophistication of your '80s songwriting with the raw production of the '70s. And I think because you
Ah,
guys had gotten back together with Udo, there was something you didn't have anything to prove, but you sort of did because the '90s were not the best time for classic metal.
yeah, the
And it's just,
'90s were tough. I
but
remember.
this was a really fun album, and obviously the most famous album. It's funny I can't find my copy of Balls to the Wall, so I'll just put it on the screen. But Balls to the Wall had that classic black and white look, made you think of Helmut Newton for some reason, something
Yeah,
like that. It was very controversial, and this is in a sort of set way, kind of matching the politics of the album and talking about because there's a lot of themes of the downtrodden, the average person being manipulated by those in power. So, what advice would you give to younger photographers who are starting out? If it, in
yeah,
terms of artistry, in terms of maybe trying to make a living, I mean, you obviously made or transitioned for a while into the corporate world, the
yeah, man.
commercial world.
I think it's an interesting thought that anything that goes digital goes to a huge transition, and we're going through that right now with AI. If you think about it,
Yeah,
with visual art, with music, and even with journalistic stuff, anything that goes digital like that goes through a huge transition. And I went through the transition in the photography world, and now that it's purely digital, and nobody would hire you to shoot any film, I mean, anymore. So I don't really know what to give advice what sort of advice to give to young photographers. I don't honestly even know how people can still make a living with photography. I remember the days when live photographers and band photographers were
yeah,
getting paid,
a
you
lot
know.
of money in the '80s. There
Yeah,
was a
a
lot
lot
of
of
money.
money. Then it went to less money, and I think now it's almost no money. People just take the pictures and basically give them away because there's no more value. I mean, the value has just dropped out of the market. So I'm sure there's still an advertising market and things like that, but honestly, I'm out of it, man. I don't really know what advice to give you or anybody. So I guess we're living in very interesting times in this whole digital revolution. I mean, I said it before in other interviews. I think this is more of a change than maybe the industrial revolution when it happened 100,
Huh.
150 years ago. The whole society went through a huge transition, but we're in the middle of something equally transitional, I think.
It's crazy. The AI thing, I'm not a fan of. I just think
No, nobody is, but it's whether we are a fan or not, it's happening. It's scary as hell, and we will see how it all fleshes out and how it all turns around. But I think a lot of jobs are going to fall by the wayside.
there's an Accept concept album in here. I think
Maybe humanoid.
Yeah,
Maybe we
exactly.
should talk about humanoids.
Yeah, there is just some of that on the new album. I almost think like an entire crazy concept AI concept album. It would be interesting to see what you guys would do. But listen, thank you very much again for
Yeah,
chatting.
maybe we should just keep our mouths shut because we had a song called "Pandemic," and
Yeah, that's right.
and then here we are talking about humanoids and zombie apocalypses and stuff. Maybe we should just not. Maybe we should just make love songs from now
Exactly.
on.